Audio.
If you want to practice at a high level for you, whatever that is, you want to do a basic minimal amount of strength training just to make sure you can tolerate practicing at that level that you're trying to practice at. If you're weak, you should do that. If you're strong, you should do that.
Hello, you wonderful, delicious struggler. How are you doing? I hope you're doing better than me. Man, I just got slammed by a late spring virus. WT fuck is up with late spring viruses. Not only did I get hit, my dad is in the hospital as I record this with pneumonia. He's doing okay. I've been visiting him. He's fine. He's going to recover. But hey, it's the last hurrah. Maybe we're getting it out of the way. I'm starting to feel a little bit better. A forced deload week. That's how I look at being sick. And I reached out to my trainer that I've been working with, and he was like, dude, just take a full week off. Take more off if you need. Do not push it hard while you're sick. So here I am, a little bit congested, but down in the podcast/utility closet, laying down an episode for you because the podcast must go on. You need your content, and especially your Dr. Tyler Nelson finger training content. So here we are, laying down a fat episode for you with the top 10 listener questions about finger training, strength training, and some other hot topics. And we get into a couple bonus questions too. It's the top 10 plus a couple bonus questions. And Dr. Tyler Nelson, as always, delivers the goods. The dude brought the science, always brings the science. Coolest nerd I've ever met. He's got fantastic tattoos, he skateboards, and he climbs like a beast. He also works with some of the strongest and best rock climbers in the world and is a research junkie, not only creating research of his own and putting these studies and papers together, but also devouring the white papers that are out there, citing them, digesting them, and then regurgitating them out into bite-sized little nerd gummies of insight for the rest of us dummies out here like me to consume so that I can be smarter with my training and thus have more time to practice this sport that I love so much. And that's what we're focusing on this one. I'm not going to recap all that we talk about because we're going to get into it in just a second. But one of the big themes, as Tyler will touch on, is that if we can be smarter with the way that we train, we can make our bodies more resilient and have more capacity to then practice the thing more. And that's how we get better at climbing. We don't get better at climbing just by getting stronger fingers. We get stronger fingers so that then we can go apply that to our climbing and get better at the sport. And God, did I learn a lot from these listener questions. Thank you all for sending these in. Tyler picked the ones that he felt would represent the subject matter the best. He also ran them by his team over at C4HP. So we're talking about Colin and Jesse over there. And he brought some very, very thoughtful answers. And if you are a subscriber of the podcast and you're helping me keep the lights on here in the podcast/utility closet, well, you get the whole thing plus some bonus questions as well. I'll tell you more about that on the back end, but let's just get right to it. I don't think you need to hear about my climbing or my training right now. I talk a little bit about it in this conversation with Tyler, and I'll do a full plug training update here at the end of the month. So let's just curl with intention into this fantastic Q&A episode here with Dr. Tyler Nelson.
Dude, it's great to see you, man. It looks like you've been getting out climbing quite a bit, unless those are old videos of you out on rock.
Oh no, it's been relatively new. It's I've kind of come to terms that my business gets a little bit slower during peak season or when the season starts because people are out doing stuff.
Yeah.
And then so it's instead of trying to grind harder, I just oh cool, I'm just gonna go climbing today.
Which is how you feeling?
Good. Yeah, I was already tweaking my back the other day a little bit, so I'm maybe 75% right now. I tried to go out yesterday, and the outcome was not amazing for being coordinated with core tension moves.
Tell you what, man, I don't know. I was feeling primed for spring season, and then I got a new basketball hoop for my kids, and I was putting it together, and it had this really heavy base, you fill the base with water, and I realized after I filled it with water that it was facing the wrong direction. So I was I can deadlift this thing, and I completely threw out my back and then had to cancel my climbing plans for a week. And I mean, A, it was a dumb move, but B, I should have been able to move it, but it just was kind of an awkward lift. And I was man, either I'm getting older or I'm getting stupider, but one or the other. When you throw your back out putting together a basketball hoop, it's not it's a good story. I wasn't going for the glory send on a high ball, I was just
Right. I mean, and the other question is, had you been deadlifting prior to that, like in your training block or training?
Don't diagnose me, doctor. I don't want a diagnosis here, all right? This isn't about me, okay? This is just it was a dumb move and now we can move on.
I mean, I'm the same, like, but when it comes to new kinds of stress, it's the new kinds of stress that's always
Right.
not really risky to do, but just like go from no deadlifting to like really heavy, awkward deadlifting is just like a big jump in.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
It's a pain in the ass.
I have been doing some deadlifting, but yeah, I think it was the awkwardness of it. But yeah, you're no stranger to taking risks off the wall. You're still posting videos of you doing skateboarding out there.
Yeah, now I'm trying to learn how to ollie onto a curb. It's just a really cool, interesting, been fun skill of just like learning something that's like takes a bunch of practice and a bunch of timing. And I have the same problem that I do with climbing is I try and over force things. So I try and use force. Like people, like if you don't know how to ollie, it feels like you need to jump really high to ollie really high, but you don't need to jump really high. So I like initially was trying to jump really high, and height kind of matters, but it's really more like a box jump. You bring your knees high to your chest with a quick like kick of your feet. So it's not really like this massive jump. So I was like spending way too much energy trying to push harder instead of like be really snappy with my legs, which is a skill that I had to learn.
Yeah, it's such a mystery. I've always wanted to ollie, and I've just decided that it's too risky to do it. But it's such like a magic trick when you see somebody do an ollie, and it's like especially like a high one. It's really crazy. Coincidentally, and we're already going down a rabbit hole here, but my son found in my parents' basement my old PlayStation 1, PS1, and the game that was in it was Tony Hawk's Street Skater.
Whoa,
and so we've been
sick.
playing like, dude, like the OG, it's like all Rage Against the Machine soundtrack, and it's Tony,
gosh.
and like, you know, the blood comes out of the head when he biffs it. Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
That's fun. I love those games for sure. I've actually looked for those games with my kids on Xbox. You can buy them too online. Like you can buy like a downloadable version, whatever, but that's sweet.
Okay, good. Well, we can dive in. We can talk about real stuff now, but great to catch up. And thanks for coming back on the show here. Always appreciate it and always learn a lot when we get together and have conversations. This is a good one. Like I like what we're doing here. So we're going to do this as a listener Q&A. I put out the APB that you were going to join the show. Got a million questions, sent a bunch over to you, and you've, I think, chosen a good smattering here that represents a variety of different areas of climbing and training and recovery and rehab and all of that. But anything you want to say to set the stage here before we dive into the listener Q&A episode?
I thought it was a really cool idea. At first I was like, yeah, I'm kind of curious what the questions would be. And then when I actually saw the questions, I think it's actually really fun just like stopping and thinking about these, because the hardest thing to do for anyone that's trying to be helpful and give information to people is not be confusing, but just when it comes to the things that I'm really interested in, it's just nuanced, and physiology is confusing. And so it's quite challenging to teach physiology to people that maybe have no background in anatomy or physiology. And so the language is confusing. And so having people actually say, well, I'm confused about this particular thing really was helpful for me to think about, okay, there's definitely a lot of other people that have the same question. So I thought it was really cool. I love the idea.
Awesome. Let's dive in, and I'm sure each answer will bring up more questions from me, but I'll try to keep us on track here. And we'll kick things off with a question from JJJ. That's triple J's. And the question is, so much of finger training seems to prioritize or default to half crimp. Personally, I hate that grip, and I tend to open hand most stuff or go complete crimp. But is half still the best way to train?
Yeah, this question is cool. And I chatted with my team yesterday as well. We had a kind of a business meeting, and also posed these questions to them because I was interested to say, well, what would your response be if your client asked you this question? Like what, is a good way to just like communicate ideas that we all run into. So,
yeah,
I mean, my initial thought was the morphology of the hand for this individual probably is why they do that preferred grip position, right? Maybe they have flexible joints, and so it seems kind of risky to full crimp things or use the half crimp, but they maybe not risky, but they can't really hold tension when they half crimp. And so if you have flexible DIP joints, when you go into a full crimp, you actually kind of lock the joint in by hyperextending the DIP joint, where half crimp, it doesn't feel stable because you can't get the stiffness through the joint.
Right.
That's initial thoughts. Does that make sense?
And just for clarity, the DIP joint is the one that's closest to the tip of the finger?
The closest to the tip of the finger, yeah. Yeah, if you watch people full crimp that have flexible fingers, there's like a lot of hyperextension of that joint to the point where you're like, whoa,
Right.
that's kind of crazy looking, right? But that makes the joint stiffer by hyperextending the joint. And so it could be that they have long fingers and the half crimp literally is not as stiff, and so they can't be stable on it. They can't control the hand position. That was my first thought.
Got it.
The other thought, I guess, about why people prescribe or say use the half crimp for training is the half crimp is kind of in the middle in terms of the force output. So the open hand position is a longer muscle length. And so essentially, if you think about like grabbing onto a sloper and applying force, you don't really apply as much force on the sloper. You mostly just hang on the sloper. So you try and rely on your skin to get a little bit of force, but it's really a passive grip. So there's not as much muscle activity involved. Where the half crimp position is a pretty middle position of muscle length. And so a lot of force can be generated on the half crimp. Ultimately, the full crimp, technically the muscle produces the most force because it has to get over those joint angles, but it's very stressful on the pulleys. And so I think like the original biomechanics papers that were done demonstrated that high force, high angle crimping was really stressful on the pulleys. And then the open position was not as muscular, not as much force. And so the middle is kind of like the default position for producing force and training the fingers.
Right. Okay. So, in the question here from the listener was specific to training. Obviously, when we're climbing, so we're going to apply that strength. We're going to grab a hold and probably reel it in whichever way feels most secure for us. And maybe that's a drag, maybe that's a full crimp, maybe it's a half crimp. But you could speak to that if you'd like, the applicability. But if I'm understanding correctly, do you feel the half crimp and why it's most often recommended? Essentially, it's less risky than a full crimp in terms of training, but will also develop whatever kind of gains you're going for that would be applicable to the open hand? Or do you think it's also good to train open hand, it's good to train drag, it's good to train full crimp? Are we almost limiting ourselves by only training half crimp?
It really depends on the individual, of course, but I think training all the positions is okay. I think we can make the open-handed position more muscular as well. So instead of only thinking that we do like open-handing, like three-finger driving at 20 mil edge, is mostly people just like are hanging on their skeletal structures and their ligaments.
Right.
But instead of just being passive, you could have a larger joint angle and still apply force through the tips of the fingers, which is intentionally a little bit more muscular, which we'll talk about with other questions. I think that's a good idea. But I also think you can train open-handed positions with other tools like the wrist wrench or a talon ball or something where you're actually forced to apply more muscle activity instead of only doing it like on fingerboard.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate that. Okay, last follow-up question I'll have on this, and then we can probably move on. And that's just when it comes to actually doing like some testing. So let's say maybe 2 or 3 times a year, we actually want to try to do like some max testing. Is there information that could be yielded by doing a test on an open hand and a test on a half crimp and a test on a full crimp that we would then maybe yield some insights into where deficiencies lie? Like, oh, I'm, much stronger on this grip versus that grip. I should train this type of grip more, or am I not quite understanding how that information would result in a plan?
That's a cool question, but the forces won't be the same on any of those grips. And so the forces aren't the same on any of those grips. It's really hard to say, oh, this one's weak compared to this one. I need to train this one more because they don't have the same mechanics.
Right.
So the open hand position doesn't like extend the wrist. So you don't like get the wrist extension like you do with the half crimp. So you don't get the muscle tension optimal to generate a lot of force. Then you don't get that torque at the PIP joint on the pulleys. And so I'm totally okay and a fan of people testing all the positions. They just need to make sure they're very intentional with the testing of the positions, but know that they're not the same. And I also think that for certain individuals, training the full crimp is okay as well. And that's what we had Rob do. I don't know if you listened to that podcast episode, but his
Test
team
piece.
were quite Yeah,
Right.
his were amazing for someone that has a big training age. But in his case, like doing a full crimp training was totally appropriate. And so if individuals use the full crimp, let's say when they're trying at their limit, but they're never really getting that exposure in the climbing gym, if they're climbing gym sets, or like they do it periodically outside, they would be okay training the full crimp. And that's really a pulley stiffness training intervention. It's connective tissue intervention too. I did my testing yesterday. I shot a video for my client about testing the fingers post finger injury. And so I used the unlevel edge and I tested like the forefinger open position. And I set it up to where I like could, I think it was 30 mil deep unlevel edge with the steps. And so I was able to like stand vertically and like curl into it. And then I also did it with half crimp. And I believe my force not warmed up at the half crimp was like 100 pounds. And my force in the open position was like 65 pounds. So like it won't be the same number. And so for people listening, don't be discouraged by that. It's just not the same muscle position.
But if you then retest, let's say in three months you retest and your half crimp is 110 pounds and your open is still 65 pounds or something like that, then what would that tell you?
It depends on what the intervention was. If the athlete's trying to get better and stronger at the open hand position, their number should definitely go up. That means their training wasn't effective, which it should be. It's not hard. And that was another question that was asked is like, how do we track things? Like strength training should be pretty easy to track if you're making progress. So both of those numbers should go up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, essentially, how much overlap is there in the system? If your half crimp is getting stronger, will just by extension your open hand also kind of be dragged along? Or is it quite specific in terms of how we're training in order to work the muscles, if you will, in the open versus like a half or a full?
I think there definitely will be some carryover. The thing that will be maybe lagging is like the coordination component. So, in addition to this, obviously we're talking about like strength training, but I would certainly have those athletes intentionally use that off the wall more and full crimp on the wall and do all these things on the wall. But I think the force should carry over. And we know that from research on isometric testing positions and training positions. If I do a 90 degree and 120 degree joint angle, those carry over to the full range of motion in some of the original isometric papers. So I think that would apply for the fingers as well.
Good. Appreciate that. Very thorough answer, not surprisingly, and more to come for sure on finger training. Let's see what Hannah has to say here. Hannah says, assuming there's a benefit to doing both hangs and curls, eccentric versus overcoming isometric, should those be rotated weekly or do a focused block for X amount of weeks for one of those methods and then switch to a new focused block for the other?
This is cool. These questions are so cool. And like, it was fun to ask these to, the coaches that I work with and just like get the response. And it's just interesting where people's brains go is like, because quickly you hear that question, you're like, okay, order, which one would I do first and why would I do one first? My initial reaction was like, if we're intentional with our finger training, we should do both all the time. And so essentially what that means is, like I posted a video within the last few months, we talked about like just squeezing a lemon almost is kind of like the intention.
Yeah.
So it's like that motion is like, if you're like say in a half grip on a fingerboard, you're essentially bringing your palm upwards as if you were squeezing something between the bottom of the board and the palm, which is flexion in the MCP joint, so neither the PIP or the DIP joint. So it's like you're squeezing something in your hand. And so if we use a fingerboard for strength training, capacity training, etc., or we do a block lift, I would say that doing that every time makes the most sense to me for getting muscles as engaged as possible, both the finger flexors, the hand muscles, which are the interossei and the lumbrical muscles, to get them engaged every time. And then whatever intervention you're doing, if you're picking your feet off the ground, you add a load, etc., that intention will keep the load a little bit more honest, which is the next question I think we're talking about. It'll hold the joint angle a little better. It'll make it a little bit more obvious, the joint angle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so just for those who are listening and not watching this, what Tyler's talking about, and you can see on his reels, is essentially he takes like a little mini like cutie, orange or kumquat or something like that, and you're putting it in your hand, and so you're kind of engaging those palm muscles, if you will. I'm sure I'm oversimplifying, though, as you're doing like a hang or a lift. The question here from Hannah is, should we work both of those types, the eccentric, where you're essentially just hanging and trying to prevent your hand from opening if you're hanging or if you're lifting something heavy, prevent your hand from opening, rather than the overcoming ISO, which again, I might be oversimplifying, but you're essentially trying to actively kind of curl into that edge, squeeze that orange, if you will, or that lemon. And I guess if I understand correctly from prior conversations, each of those offer different benefits. Like the eccentric is maybe more about the connective tissue, whereas the overcoming isometric is more about the muscle. You could maybe speak to that for a second. But are you saying when you're kind of essentially squeezing the palm, squeezing the orange during one of those, is it the best of both worlds? Are you getting eccentric benefits as well as overcoming isometric benefits? Or is there a benefit to Hannah's question on essentially keeping them separate, if you will, but then rotating them, whether it's in the same week or in a different block?
Yeah, I think being intentional with the grip, and that would be open-handed grip like we just talked about. Like I would also do it with open-handed positions, even if you're using a fingerboard, and I have my clients do that, and the half crimp and the full crimp. And so I think you'll do both. You'll definitely get the best of both worlds. The loads will be lighter than people are used to though, which in my opinion is like a safety thing. And I don't think there's any real downside to doing that because the loads are so great. And we can talk at some point about new research papers that have just come out that kind of validate the idea and the reliability of isolating the finger flexors for testing, because it's just like more intra and intersession reliable between individuals. So like there's definitely some value in being as intentional as you can with the muscle before you're doing a finger load. Really what she's asking is like, would I do one before the other? Would I do fingerboarding stuff before I did like overcoming isometric stuff?
Right.
And in terms of order, I would say I would do the eccentric or the yielding or the fingerboarding prior to the overcoming stuff. So think about it as like a pre-season and an in-season. And my opinion there comes from what we know about true eccentrics and true concentrics, which aren't the same thing, but there's definitely some relationship there, is the eccentrics are more fatiguing, but you can tolerate a lot more load. And so they're a lot more load, so they'll build a lot of connective tissue resilience, etc., and some hypertrophy as well, but they're harder to recover from. And so conversely, the concentrics are easier to recover from, and they're all about muscular activity. So I would do the yielding prior to the overcoming.
Got it. And you're talking about a season. So like if you're in a training block, training in the winter to prepare for the spring, during the winter, you would do more of that eccentric or yielding style. And then as the season approaches, you would switch over to the more of the curling, the overcoming isometric, focusing on the muscles and faster recovery, and then continue that through season, but not necessarily do more of the hangs, the heavier hangs, the eccentric hangs, until you've got less time that you're wanting to actually get out and perform.
Yeah, the example could be people do max hangs, or they do some form of repeater protocols, a couple days per week for maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And then when it gets close to the season, then change and do overcoming style isometrics, or do intentional heavy block lifts from the floor, something that's really focused on muscular activity, that's not as focused on longer time frames, more tissue stretching, etc. And then what they'll notice is the connective tissues will adapt very quickly, and the recruitment will get very high pretty quickly. And then they'll be able to see a power improvement on the wall, because when you get high levels of recruitment, those fibers are naturally fast twitch. So people tend to see a big benefit by having that transition.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Hannah, thank you for the question. We can move on here to, I don't have the person's name on this one. My apologies. I think it came through Instagram, this one. And the question is, I've heard Tyler share recently that if the hand opens up during a max hang or a lift, then the lift is useless. But doesn't that happen when we climb sometimes?
I mean, I don't know that I would say useless, and hopefully I've never said useless. I think it's probably a little bit more risk than like if you're in a static position. But ultimately, I would say like that kind of defies the reason that you're doing it, right? So if you think about like, why do we strength train? Like we're trying to strength train, and when we use the term strength train, there's these certain adaptations that we're looking for to happen. And one of the most important ones is the coordination. So the position that you're actually trying to train is the thing that you actually do care about, and the recruitment levels that you get with that intervention, right? And so I want the intention to be muscular as possible because I want to maximize my recruitment, and I want to train that particular position because I want the pulleys and the ligaments and all the tissues to adapt to that particular grip type. And so if we wanted to train an open-handed position, train the open-handed position in addition to the half crimp position. But I think falling into an open hand position from a half crimp is like, that's not really the point of that position. That makes sense?
Yeah. So, and I guess just maybe to go back to the first part there, which is, I've seen it and I'm not sure who's shared it, but essentially like, oh, hey, if you're training in this manner, like the goal is the half crimp and it starts to open up, that's your indication that either your session is done or there's too much weight. Is that a fair kind of internal rule to go by? Or is there an amount of like, oh, if I really want to rip something super heavy, like my hand's going to open a little bit and that's okay? Or is it just is that more of an ego-driven thing that we just want to lift the heaviest things possible and maybe we should just take like 10 pounds off and keep the position?
I mean, it's fun as hell to lift heavy stuff and it's fun as hell to do one-arm hangs and do all the things. But is that like if you would think about that as like, would that count as a quality rep? And most people would say, not really. In another strength training contest, if you were like doing a max weighted pull up, right? And like let's say you do a max weighted pull up from 90 degrees, but you like, the first thing you do is you go down. Like if you're going down, you're not producing enough force to go back up. So for my opinion, when people do those huge loads, like there's no way their muscles, their finger flexor muscles can overcome and yield to that load. It's too heavy.
Well, this may tie back into, you were saying, some research that's come out about kind of the effectiveness of various finger training. Is there a large gap in effectiveness between 95% of one's max and 85% of one's max? If we're talking about keeping a hand position or not, essentially, what's the minimal effective dose? Is that the right terminology for like what a max lift would be?
Not in finger training per se, but in general strength training, certainly like most people's working sets are at 85%. Most people will do a 1 repetition max periodically and every 4 to 6 weeks, but they're not trying to do it every session. And so when you're doing like a working load, like keep the load honest based on the position. And if people actually use that same kind of squeeze a lemon analogy and they essentially curl into it a little bit more and get the grip really tight, I like to have people visualize they're trying to curl the load off the ground almost, and they should get pretty close to it, but they won't be able to, and then they can stand up with it so you can load the molecules at the end of the muscle fibers that tighten to get more connective tissue load. Like that's the load that you want to use. That's the load that you want to consider like your maximum effort if you go for maximum effort. And then you would just drop that to like 85% to do a training intervention. But the difference between 85 and 95 is...
All right, that seems like a fair and logical place to do the fade out here on your free intro on this Pro Clinic with Dr. Tyler Nelson, and we spoke for more than an hour. If you want to gain full access to this episode, this is how I pay the bills over here to do the podcast. Most of the stuff I give away is for free and supported by sponsors, but these Pro Clinics are just for subscribers, those who join in Patreon or Apple subscriptions. And there's a free trial too. So anyway, if you are psyched on finger training, strength training, and being the most efficient and effective with how you are preparing yourself to climb, then this episode's for you. And there's more than an hour, and let me just hit on some of the bullets that we are covering in the rest of this conversation. We're answering your questions, listeners' top 10 questions, including, is it better to be strong for the grade or weak for the grade? The mistake of correlating finger strength to grades, the difference between amateurs and pros on their strength to grade performance. Very interesting topic there. And then that dovetailed into this next one, which was, I think, maybe the most mind-blowing for me, which was this study that happened that Tyler talks about where elite climbers were compared to more amateur climbers like me, like a weekend warrior, on how much force they use on climbs. So they did the same climbs and they measured the force that each of them used, and the results blew my mind. And then the reason why those results were the way they were has really changed the way I think about my training and how much time I practice on the wall versus off the wall. What else did we talk about? Max hang benefits at times ranging from 3 to 7 to 10 to 30 seconds. Set and rep scheme to avoid fatigue when strength training. That was really cool. Training while injured, always a hot topic. And, oh God, there's so much more. I'll just hit on a few more here. So many good questions that you all sent in. Let's see. How to know when to end a training session for optimal recovery and gains. How to train power and endurance on the same day. I found that really interesting because of my busy schedule, and there's a good way to do that. Oh, here's a fun one. This is like a little bonus for you guys. We talked about how to beat the carnival game where it's like the pull-up bar, but it spins. You have to hang for 2 minutes on it. How does Tyler program his training and his climbing days? Oh my God, this episode slaps. All that and just so much more is available for about the price of a beer over on Patreon or Apple subscriptions, or actually 0 cost right now with a free trial. So if you want to hear the rest of this Pro Clinic, plus get instant access to more than 100 hours of other banger content, and I'm talking about Pro Clinics and bonus episodes from the likes of Adam Andra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Dave McLeod, Hazel Finley, Tom Randall, Alex Honnold, and so many more. It is all over there, and I think it's worth a few bucks a month. But if you don't like it, you can cancel anytime. No worries, no questions asked. If you're a Spotify listener, you can subscribe through Patreon right there in your Spotify player to unlock all of those episodes. If you're an iPhone person, you can do it right there also in your podcast player by just double-clicking that side button to start the free trial and to subscribe. Or if you like to listen various places on your computer as well as on your phone, you can just swing over to patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show to support me there and get instant access to all of those goods. Now be sure to check your show notes for links from this conversation and how to work with today's pro, and you can see clips from this conversation over on IG at The Struggle Climbing Show. The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation and is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. This show was produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by Glenn Walker. All right, what are you waiting for? Pop over to Patreon and listen to the rest of this Banger Pro Clinic. I hope your training and your climbing are going great. And you know what? If you're struggling like me, well, let's just remember that the struggle makes us stronger. I'll see y'all.